If my father hadn't died that week, I never would have known he'd spent the last years of his life protecting me in secret, and I never would have walked into the will reading they tried to keep me out of, with the very documents that would bring the entire room to a standstill. It started with a phone call, and a name I hadn't seen on my screen in half a decade. Savannah Gray. When I answered, I wasn't prepared to hear 3 words that cracked open everything I thought I'd buried. Landon, he's gone. I didn't respond right away. I just stared out across the Lisbon skyline where I'd been finalizing contracts for my next boutique hotel. Sunlight crawled up the terracotta walls like it did every morning, but now the air felt heavier, like I was breathing through someone else's grief. He passed in his sleep, Savannah said gently. It was peaceful. But nothing about that news felt peaceful. My father, Thomas Reed, wasn't just gone. He'd been taken from me long before this, in boardroom betrayals, phone calls that never came, letters I never received. And now, just as silently as he vanished from my life, he had left it altogether. They've planned the funeral, she added. Friday. Victoria's organizing everything. Of course she was. And the will reading? I asked, already knowing. Tomorrow at noon, she said, then quieter. You're not on the guest list. There it was, a decade of legacy, trust, and blood erased by a woman who had worn my father's last name but never respected the meaning of it. I turned away from the skyline and stared at the stack of contracts on my desk. I had built a quiet empire overseas, luxury, design-driven hotels rooted in restoration and cultural heritage. I had created something that would have made him proud, but he'd never seen it. Or maybe he had. I'm coming back, I told Savannah. Let them try and stop me. By the next afternoon, I was staring out the window of a town car crawling past familiar streets in Savannah, Georgia. The moss-draped oaks overhead looked exactly as I remembered, but the house at the end of Oakland Drive, the place where I learned to ride a bike, balance a ledger, and say goodbye to my mother, felt like a stranger now. It was white, still, proud, but cold. And the inn, the Reed House, was worse. Once a symbol of hospitality and legacy, it now stood tired, abandoned, and betrayed. The paint was flaking, and a sleek black SUV sat in the lot where guests used to park for Sunday brunch. A discreet "for sale" sign leaned half-concealed behind the hydrangeas, selling it off, just like she sold off everything else. The car stopped in the circular driveway and no one came out to greet me, so I walked up alone. When the door opened, I saw exactly what I expected. Victoria Blake Reed. Still poised, still smiling the way you do when you've already written the ending, and you don't expect the protagonist to show up for the final scene. Landon, she said. What a surprise. I heard about Dad, I replied. I came to pay my respects. Of course. We weren't sure if you'd be able to make it. You've been gone a long time. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I walked out after the board meeting she orchestrated, one where she convinced my father I wasn't ready to lead, one where I realized loyalty had a shelf life in this house. She stepped aside. The air smelled like lavender and fresh polish. All the warm wood furniture had been replaced with glass and chrome. Photographs? Gone. Paintings of abstract shapes lined the walls where our family used to live. Where's Dad's office? I asked. Oh, we turned that into Preston's gym. He needed space for the Peloton and weights. Of course he did. And the inn? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She tilted her head like I'd asked about the weather. It's not profitable anymore. We're exploring buyers. Your father agreed before he got sick. I watched her face carefully. She lied well, but not perfectly. Funny, I said. He and I started that renovation plan together. I remember him calling it the soul of the family. She smiled like I'd misremembered. That was years ago. That night, I stayed in the guest room. Not my old bedroom. That had been repurposed. No one would say for what. The room they gave me smelled like new linens and artificial calm. No trace of me. No evidence that I had once been part of this family. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. Even the baseboards had changed, erased. repainted. Just before 10, I heard the quiet creak of the back door. A familiar knock followed, 2 short taps, a pause, then one soft knock. Savannah. She stepped in wearing a denim jacket and soft worry on her face. Her presence always steadied something in me, even when the ground was shifting. "You really came," she said. "They didn't make it easy." She set a paper bag on the dresser. "Pulled pork, from Bernard's. Thought you might need something familiar." I opened it, letting the scent fill the room. "They're selling the inn," I said. She nodded, lips tight. "Victoria's been meeting with investors. Some guy from Miami came to tour it last week. But your dad, he was trying to stop it. Near the end, he kept asking about you, said he needed to fix things." I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice not to break. "They're holding the will reading tomorrow," she added. "Noon. But Victoria made it clear, it's family only." I looked at her, a bitter smile rising to my face. "They think they erased me." Savannah leaned against the dresser. "You're not going to let them, are you?" I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town I used to belong to. Then I turned back to her and said, "They want to fight over Dad's legacy?" I picked up the fork, tasted the pork, and nodded. "Good, because I came home hungry." I arrived at Alcott and Bloom's law offices 5 minutes before noon. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than it was. I stood alone, staring at my reflection in the polished chrome. The charcoal suit I wore still held the scent of travel, and the tie, a silk navy blue, had once belonged to my father. A small thing, but intentional. He had worn it to every meeting that mattered. Today, it was mine. The receptionist looked up as I entered the lobby. Her expression froze for half a second, polite but surprised. "Mr. Reed?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm here for the will reading." Her eyes flicked to a list on her desk. "Let me just check with Mr. Alcott." Translation: "You weren't expected." She disappeared down a hallway, heels clicking too quickly. I waited in the silence, watching the office staff walk past behind frosted glass. Beyond them, the skyline of downtown Savannah glinted under noon light. Steel and sky and ambition. My father had helped design half the commercial real estate in this city. He built it block by block, corner by corner. Now the legacy he left behind was about to be carved up behind a conference room door. The receptionist returned. "Mr. Alcott will be with you shortly," she said, a little breathless. "He just needs a moment." Moments later, the door opened. Brent Alcott, silver-haired, straight-backed, and clearly uncomfortable. My father's longtime attorney. He used to ruffle my hair when I sat in on meetings as a teenager. Now he looked at me like I was a lawsuit waiting to happen. "Landon," he said. No handshake. "We weren't aware you'd be attending today's meeting." "I'm family," I said evenly. "There were certain expectations around attendance," he said carefully. "Given the estrangement—" "I'm my father's only biological child," I interrupted. "Let's not pretend that's unclear." He blinked. "I'll be attending," I continued, "unless you'd prefer the actual heir waits in the hallway." There was a beat of silence. Then, reluctantly, he stepped aside and gestured me in. The conference room was long and cold. Mahogany table, neutral gray walls, the kind of space built for signatures and settlements, not grief. Victoria was already seated at the head of the table, dressed in elegant black with a diamond-studded brooch that probably cost more than the staff's annual bonuses. Amelia and Preston sat flanking her like matching bookends, equally styled, equally unreadable. Several others filled the seats: my father's banker, a cousin on Victoria's side I barely remembered, and a sharply dressed man I didn't recognize. He gave me a once-over like I was the wrong guest at a private gala. The room fell quiet when I stepped in. Victoria was the first to speak. "Landon," she said, as if addressing a disturbance. "You weren't invited." "I came anyway," I said calmly, sliding into the empty chair across from her. "Why?" Preston scoffed. "So you can pretend you still matter?" I looked at him, then at Brent. "Shall we begin?" Brent cleared his throat, his discomfort radiating through the room. We're here to execute the last will and testament of Thomas Everett Reed." He unfolded a legal packet, adjusted his glasses, and began. "To my wife, Victoria Blake Reed," he read, "I leave our family residence at 118 Oakland Drive, its contents, and a secured account in her name totaling $2 million. Victoria didn't flinch. She was expecting more, or had already helped herself to it before the reading. "To my stepdaughter, Amelia Blake," Brent continued, "I leave the contents of my library, including my first edition collection, and the sum of $500,000. Amelia's lips parted slightly. Even she seemed unsure how to react. "To my stepson, Preston Blake," Brent read, "I leave my watch collection and $1 million in trust." Preston leaned back in his chair, smug. I didn't react. "And to my son," Brent said, pausing. All eyes shifted. "Landon Everett Reed," he read, "I leave all legal rights, ownership, and operational control of Reed House Holdings, including all associated commercial and hospitality assets, existing and future." The room held its breath. Then Victoria laughed. It was sharp, uncontrolled, a burst of disbelief. "This has to be a mistake," she said. "It isn't," Brent replied, more quietly now. "He changed the will 2 years ago. I was there," he said. "A new filing was registered 6 months ago," Brent said, "executed and witnessed by an independent firm. I received a copy myself the day before Thomas passed." Victoria's expression froze, then cracked. "You should have told me." "I didn't know," Brent replied. She turned to me, seething. "You don't even live here." "And yet," I said, reaching into my briefcase, "I still managed to secure this." I placed the folder on the table and slid it forward, slowly, deliberately. Inside were property deeds, notarized and sealed. Reed House Inn, 2 commercial buildings on Bay Street, the waterfront boutique project under design review, everything. "These were transferred directly to me through legal trusts," I said, "over the last 3 years, signed by my father." Victoria reached for the folder, flipping through the documents with trembling hands. Her eyes darted across the names, the dates, the official stamps. "This is fraud," she whispered. "No," Brent said, reviewing the top document. "It's not. I notarized one of these myself." "You were never supposed to come back," she said to me, low and bitter. I met her gaze. "That was your first mistake." The room had gone so quiet, I could hear the tick of Brent Alcott's wristwatch. Victoria's eyes scanned the property deeds with the desperation of someone looking for a loophole. Any loophole. But there was nothing. Just clean signatures, clear dates, and one undeniable fact. My father had handed over the crown jewels of his estate to me, the inn, the Bay Street commercial buildings, the undeveloped land on the East Marsh, marked for sustainable tourism. All transferred, all clean, all mine. She finally pushed the folder away, her voice frayed and brittle. "You manipulated him, that's what this is." I didn't flinch. "I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. You made sure of that." Preston leaned forward, trying to inject swagger into a room where he'd clearly lost it. "You don't just disappear for 5 years and walk back into a fortune, Landon. That's not how this works." "No," I said slowly, "but apparently, that's how Dad wanted it to work." Brent cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed filed these transfers over the course of 3 years, each one notarized, each one reviewed for tax compliance. There's no ambiguity here." Victoria's voice was ice wrapped in velvet. "You think this gives you control?" "I don't think," I said, standing up and gathering the folder back into my briefcase. "I know." She opened her mouth to speak again, but I didn't wait. I buttoned my jacket, nodded at Brent, and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I paused. "Oh, and just for clarity?" I turned. "You tried to keep me from the will reading." I tapped the briefcase. "But the real decisions were made long before today." And then I left them in silence. Outside, the Savannah sun was unrelenting. I slipped on my sunglasses and let the heat settle over me like armor. My car was parked around the corner, but I didn't get in right away. I just stood there, letting the moment catch up to me. For the first time in 5 years, I felt the weight of my father's decisions and his faith in me. He hadn't just left me documents, he had left me a message, and I knew exactly where to find the rest of it. The next morning, I arrived at Coastal Heritage Bank just after opening. The place hadn't changed, same brass handles, same scuffed tile floors. I passed through the lobby like a man on a mission, because I was. "May I help you?" the teller asked. "I need to access safety deposit box 214. She looked me up and down. "Do you have the key?" I pulled it from my wallet. A small brass key with a faded red tag. I'd found it behind a painting in the inn's cellar, a spot only my father and I ever knew about. A place we used to stash Christmas gifts, old tax files, and once, a model train set I never had time to finish building. The manager escorted me into a narrow hallway. Rows of boxes lined the walls like secrets, each one locked tight. He opened the steel drawer and stepped back. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Reed." Inside was a single brown envelope. I stared at it for a moment before reaching in. It was thick, several sheets of paper, folded neatly. No wax seal, no ceremony, just a letter. My father's handwriting covered the first page, neat and strong. My throat tightened before I even read the first word, Landon. "If you're reading this, then the timing I hoped for didn't quite work out. And I'm sorry. For the silence, for the pride, for every mile that opened between us. But I need you to know, I was never choosing her over you. I was trying to keep the storm outside the walls. I failed. You were right about what this business could be. You always were. By the time I saw it, it was almost too late. So I started moving the pieces. The properties in this box, every transfer, every signed deed, was my way of building something with you again. Even if I never got to say the words out loud. Don't let her sell what we built. Don't let them gut the soul out of this town. And Landon, you are the legacy. Everything else is paper. Loved, Dad." I sat there for a long time with the letter in my lap. There was something unbearable about reading love after death, especially from a man who rarely said it in life. But here it was, quiet and firm, buried in a steel box and wrapped in the one thing I'd always hoped for: faith. Later that day, I walked into the inn for the first time in years. It was empty, quiet, and smelled like dust and dried lavender. A cleaning crew had already stripped the bedsheets. Art had been taken off the walls. A single bulb flickered in the hallway. I climbed the stairs to my father's office, the one Victoria said was now vacant. I opened the door and stepped inside. The desk was gone, but the wall safe wasn't. Behind it, a second envelope waited. No label, just a USB drive taped inside. I slid it into my laptop and waited as the video loaded. My father appeared on screen, thinner, paler, but clear-eyed. "If you're watching this, son, then you found the key. Good." His voice cracked, then steadied. I never wanted to turn the business into a war zone, but I saw what was happening, what Victoria was doing, what she was preparing the kids to do, and I knew I had to act. He looked into the lens for a long moment. "I should have fought for you harder, so now I'm giving you the power to fight back." He listed each property, each reason, each plan. Then he paused. "You'll hear things about me, that I changed, that I let greed in. Maybe that's true." He leaned forward. "But I never stopped believing in you." I sat there for nearly an hour after the video ended. Then I stood, locked the office door behind me, and walked back into the sunlight. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about ownership, and honoring a legacy no one else had the vision or the patience to protect. I always thought I knew every inch of the Reed House Inn. As a kid, I used to sneak down the back staircase after bedtime, skipping the 6th step because it creaked like a confession. I knew which radiator hissed loudest in winter, which floorboard in the dining hall tilted ever so slightly to the right, and where my father hid the backup cash box during tax season. But I never knew about the compartment beneath his office floor. Not until that afternoon. I had come back with one goal: take inventory. Ownership wasn't just about paper, it was about presence. If I was going to honor my father's legacy, I needed to know the state of things firsthand. The inn was still under light care per Victoria's instructions, but it looked more like abandonment. Dust filmed every wood surface. Cobwebs trembled in corners. The grand chandelier in the foyer flickered with one working bulb. And in the office, his office, there was something off. A rug had been moved, rolled up, pushed halfway beneath a cabinet. When I bent to reposition it, I saw the pattern of dust that framed it perfectly, like it had been moved often, deliberately. Beneath it, one panel of hardwood that didn't match the others. It looked almost identical. Almost. The grain was too uniform. The varnish didn't reflect light quite the same way. I tapped it with my knuckle. Hollow. A second later, I had a screwdriver from the utility closet and was prying the panel loose. It gave with a soft snap. Inside was a black fireproof envelope. Just one, labeled in thick ink, in case they try to erase you. The room tilted slightly when I read it. There was no signature, no date, but I knew the handwriting. It was my father's, and it was sharper than I remembered. Angrier. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were 3 documents, folded tightly. All 3 bore the insignia of Reed Legacy Counsel, a planning and estate advisory firm he had mentioned only once, years ago, in passing. The first was a legal memorandum. It outlined, in painstaking detail, my father's original estate division plan, one that split assets equally between me and Victoria's children, not because he trusted them, but because he thought it would keep the peace. But at the bottom, in red ink, they made peace impossible. The second document was a revocation, nullifying the first plan, and the third was a detailed succession letter, written to me. Landon. I tried the easy way, the quiet way. I thought splitting the estate might give them fewer reasons to hate you, but they didn't want to share. They wanted it all. Amelia found the early draft, showed it to Victoria. They used it to justify freezing you out. You were right to leave. So I built a new structure, one they couldn't touch. Quietly, property by property, trust by trust. They called you ungrateful. But what they never understood was, this business? This legacy? It started with your spreadsheets, your vision, your tireless damn belief that we could be more than just another Southern inn. And we were. You made me believe again. So if you're reading this, and I hope you are, know this. The empire is yours now. Protect it. Grow it. And don't look back. Dad, I sat on the floor for a long time after that. The office was quiet except for the occasional tick of the wall clock, a sound I hadn't noticed since I was 12. And all I could think about was how much effort it must have taken for my father to plan this. Alone. While smiling through every dinner with Victoria, while listening to Amelia talk about her marketing degrees and Preston rattle off fantasy football stats as if that was business acumen, he knew. He knew they were coming for it, and he knew they'd leave me with nothing if they could. So he left me this instead. Everything, hidden beneath a floorboard, wrapped in quiet trust. The next day, I made my first official visit as owner to the downtown development office. There, I submitted paperwork to transfer all pending renovation permits and commercial rights for Reed House Inn and its satellite properties under Reed Holdings Trust LLC, with me as the managing principal. The clerk blinked. You're Landon Reed? I nodded. She looked down at the name again. You're the one they've been trying to block for years. Not anymore, I said, signing the final line. By the end of the week, I had reopened my father's email server. Password protected, but I knew his favorite musician, Springsteen, and the year he got his pilot's license. Once inside, I found everything. Threads between him and architects, engineers, environmental consultants, plans for a coastal renewal project, the biggest one Savannah had seen in a decade, one Victoria had no idea about. And there, in the drafts folder, was an unsent email addressed to me. Subject, I waited too long. Landon. I've written this 20 times, maybe 30, always backspaced, always chickened out. But tonight I'm just going to let it sit here. Maybe you'll never read it, or maybe if you do, it'll be enough. I watched you walk away that day. And I let you. I let you go because part of me thought maybe you needed space. But the truth? I was afraid you'd never come back. And I didn't know if I deserved to ask you to. But I'm proud of you. I never said it enough. Not to your face. Not when it counted. But I'm saying it now. Proud of who you became. Proud of how hard you work. Proud that you saw me, even when I didn't see myself anymore. Loved Dad. I didn't cry when I read it. Not then. I just sat there, in the old leather chair in his office, staring at the screen until the sun started to set across the bay windows. That was the day I stopped seeing the inn as just a business. It was a legacy. And it was mine to restore. The invitation came in a cream envelope, monogrammed in gold. From the outside, it could have passed for a wedding announcement or a holiday card, but the moment I saw the return address, Preston and Amelia's condo in Historic District North, I knew what it really was: a performance. Inside, please join us for a small Reed family dinner in honor of Dad. Friday 6 p.m. cocktail attire. We'd love to reconnect as a family and discuss a path forward. No signature, just the Reeds. Not one mention of the will reading, not a word about the property deeds, not even an acknowledgement that I now legally owned most of the family's assets. They wanted to play nice, or pretend to, but I didn't show up to pretend. I showed up to end the act. The dinner was hosted in their rooftop suite, one of the newer developments funded, ironically, by a silent partner my father had once called a bad bet. A valet took my keys without comment. I stepped into the private elevator and rode silently to the top floor. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the scent of rosemary lamb and the unmistakable sound of curated jazz. Preston opened the door, fake warmth stretched across his face like taffy. "Landon, you made it." "I was invited," I said, stepping past him. Inside, the table was set for 7. Glassware sparkled, candles flickered. A bottle of Cabernet breathed on the counter next to hors d'oeuvres that looked straight out of a Michelin photo shoot. Victoria stood near the bar in a sapphire dress, holding court like a senator's wife. Amelia sat with her legs crossed at the fireplace, scrolling through her phone like this dinner was beneath her. The 2 cousins, barely out of college, were arguing softly over a crypto app on one of their screens. Not one of them looked up until I cleared my throat. Then all eyes turned. "I see you've made yourself comfortable," Victoria said, offering a tight smile. "It's my property now," I said casually. "Comfort's part of the package." Preston clapped his hands. "All right, let's not make this a thing. We're here to reconnect." I didn't sit. "You want to reconnect? Start by calling it what it is. You held a will reading behind my back. You tried to erase me." Victoria's glass clinked against her ring. "Landon, this is neither the time nor the place." "No," I cut in, voice level. "This is exactly the time and exactly the place, because the last time I was told to stay quiet, I lost 5 years of my father's life." The room froze. I let the silence settle before I continued. "I found the letter, the original estate plan, the one you intercepted, the one Dad revoked when he realized you were grooming his legacy like it was your birthright." Amelia set her glass down a little too quickly. "That's a serious accusation." I looked directly at her. "So is perjury, but I haven't filed yet." That got their attention. I pulled a folded paper from my blazer pocket and laid it gently on the marble counter. The wax seal gleamed red against the cream paper. "A motion," I said. "Preliminary, but it outlines a request to freeze all activity regarding remaining non-transferred assets until an audit can determine the extent of financial manipulation and document withholding by non-blood heirs." Victoria's nostrils flared. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said quietly. Dinner was served 10 minutes later, but no one touched the lamb. The cousins left early, mumbling something about meetings. Amelia retreated to the bedroom under the guise of a migraine. That left Preston, Victoria, and me, 3 people seated at a table set for reconciliation, but boiling with years of betrayal. She reached for a knife, slicing a limp piece of asparagus with surgical grace. "You know what your problem is, Landon?" she said, her tone as calm as a heartbeat in denial. "You think truth equals power. But in this world, Perception is everything. You might have deeds, signatures, letters, but we have something you never will. And what's that? I asked. She smiled like she'd been waiting all evening to say it. Narrative. I pushed my chair back, slow and deliberate. Funny, I said, rising to my feet, because narrative works both ways. She frowned. What do you mean? I mean I already submitted the video. Victoria's eyes darted up. What video? The one Dad recorded, the one where he names me as the rightful heir, the one where he explains how you buried his original letter. Her wineglass trembled slightly. And who did you submit this to? The press, I said, and the board of the Preservation Society. You know, the one that granted Reed House Inn its heritage status? You wouldn't. I leaned in, voice calm. I already did. I didn't stay for dessert. Outside, the night air felt electric, like lightning was waiting somewhere just off stage. But I wasn't afraid of storms anymore. I wasn't even afraid of them, because for the first time in years, they were finally afraid of me. And this wasn't about reclaiming a seat at the table. It was about flipping the entire table over and building a better one in its place. If you've ever watched a room full of people turn on someone they used to applaud, you'll understand what happened that Thursday night. The community center off Ellis Street wasn't designed for tension. It smelled faintly of pine disinfectant and popcorn from the vending machine. Folding chairs lined the walls. A dry erase board read, Preservation Society, Monthly Agenda. But by 6:45 p.m., it was standing room only. They came for one reason, the future of Reed House Inn. They came because for 30 years, my father had poured his soul into that place, and they came because the news had broken. Someone had tried to rewrite that legacy behind closed doors. The article had dropped at noon, a clean exposé by a well-known Southern culture columnist. Headline, Whose Legacy Is It Anyway? Inside the Quiet Fight for Savannah's Historic Reed House Inn. The piece didn't name names, but it quoted enough documents, enough letters, to paint a picture. A son exiled, a stepmother maneuvering, an inn at risk, and me standing at the crossroads. By 1 p.m., my phone hadn't stopped buzzing. By 4 o'clock, the local preservation board called to request a statement, and by 6:30, I walked into that meeting, knowing exactly what I needed to say. They gave me 5 minutes to speak. 5 minutes to explain what my father had built and what others had tried to dismantle behind his back. I stood at the front, hands steady. My name is Landon Reed. You probably remember me as the quiet kid who used to refill coffee at the Mother's Day brunches. Soft chuckles rose from the crowd. One woman near the back nodded, Mrs. Callahan, who used to bring homemade jam every spring. But tonight I'm not here as a kid, I said. I'm here as the legal custodian of Reed House Inn and as a son who almost lost the only thing his father left him. I held up the letter, the real one, signed, dated, witnessed. This was my father's true legacy planning document. It was hidden, buried, because some people thought legacy should be taken, not earned. Murmurs now, disbelief, and support. I continued. But I'm not here to reopen wounds, I'm here to open doors. That line landed, hard. I've reviewed my father's final proposals. He wanted to make Reed House more than a historical site. He wanted it to be a living part of this community again, a venue for school events, art exhibits, even shelter programs during hurricane season. Someone clapped, then another. And that's what I intend to do, not just in name, in action, with your help. The room stood. I didn't ask them to, but they did. And that was the moment everything changed. After the meeting, I stood outside under the string lights draped along the sidewalk railing. People shook my hand, thanked me. Some even apologized for believing the headlines years ago when I left town. One man, around my father's age, held my gaze longer than most. You know, he said, your dad wasn't perfect, but he sure loved that place. I think he'd be damn proud tonight. I hope so, I said quietly. Then he added, and don't let the ones with polished shoes and sharpened smiles tell you legacy comes from bloodline. Legacy comes from work. That night, I returned to the inn and unlocked the main entrance with the new brass key the city clerk handed me that afternoon. It still smelled like old wood, lavender cleaner, and time itself. I didn't turn the lights on right away. I just walked through the lobby, touching the carved banister my father had restored himself. He used to spend Sunday mornings there, sanding until his palms turned red. The moonlight spilled in through the skylight. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We're back." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own history. I felt like the beginning of something better. The following day, I met with the Preservation Society board. No longer a request. This time, they asked me what my plans were. I laid out the renovation timeline. I showed them the environmental studies, the accessibility blueprints, and the budget for community programming. One of them, a former judge, leaned forward and said, "Mr. Reed, your proposal is stronger than most we've seen in years. We're prepared to grant not just protection status, but funding support." I exhaled. Not relief, just recognition. For the first time in a long time, someone believed me without requiring an apology first. 2 hours later, Amelia called. The screen blinked her name. I let it ring. Let it die. She texted, "This wasn't supposed to go this far. Let's talk. Please." But it was too late for please. Because the community had made their decision. And so had I. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I got the message. Not from Victoria, not from Amelia, but from a developer named Chase Beaumont, whose name had once circled cocktail parties like gossip with a business card. The voicemail was brief. "Mr. Reed, we haven't heard from you regarding the transfer agreement. I assume the silence is a negotiating tactic. Totally fair. But as a courtesy, I'd recommend reviewing the amended offer before Friday. Talk soon." Transfer agreement? I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew where to find out. I drove straight to the local records office. It was housed in a historic brick building downtown, with flaking green shutters and a front desk clerk who looked like she moonlighted as a crossword puzzle champion. I handed her my ID and asked to see the file on parcel 7430-B, which included the backlot behind the Reed House Inn, a piece of land my father had used for parking, garden events, and once, a wedding for a couple who couldn't afford the main venue. The clerk returned with a thin manila folder and an arched brow. "Bit of a scramble on this one," she said. "Been about 6 requests on it this week alone." I opened the folder, and there it was. An unsigned purchase option agreement, predated, slipped into the file like it belonged there, with a clause that, if approved by a family representative, would sell the land to Beaumont and Hartman Properties for $1.2 million. One problem, I was the only legal representative. So who had submitted it? I parked outside Preston and Amelia's condo that evening. The sun hadn't even set yet, but every window was dark, except one. The balcony door was open. Voices carried down in soft bursts. I stepped closer, recognized Preston's laugh, the one he saved for people richer than him. Then I heard Amelia's voice. "He doesn't know. He thinks the land's just sentimental." A pause. Ice clinked. "I can get the signature. Trust me. He still wants peace. He just doesn't know what that's worth yet." Something in me stilled. Not anger, not betrayal. Calculation. I walked back to the car and sent one email. Just one. To Beaumont. "Mr. Beaumont, I am the sole legal custodian of the property in question. No agreement has been or will be authorized by me. Please consider this notice of cease and desist regarding any further communications with third parties concerning parcel 7430-B. Regards, Landon Reed." Then I attached the documentation. And hit send. 2 hours later, I got a reply. Short, cold. "Understood. Thank you for clarifying." No apology, no backpedaling. But I didn't need one. Because now I had proof that they were still working in shadows, still making moves behind my back. And the best part? They didn't know I knew. Not yet. That night I made a plan. I wasn't going to sue them. Not yet. That would only force them into defensive PR mode. Instead, I was going to force their hand, make them reveal how far they were willing to go. So I called the city zoning office and submitted an application to reclassify parcel 7430-B as protected green space, dedicated for public gatherings, nonprofit events, and historical education. Once approved, the property would be legally unsellable for profit development, and all of this would be filed publicly by the end of the week. Friday afternoon, Victoria showed up at the inn unannounced. She walked in like it still belonged to her, heels clicking against the wood floor, Chanel bag slung like armor. "I heard about the zoning petition," she said, not wasting a second. "Good," I said. "Transparency is important." She stared at me, eyes scanning for weakness. "Do you realize what you're giving up? That land could fund your entire project. Hell, it could fund your next 3 projects. I'm not interested in flipping my father's legacy for short-term capital." She leaned forward. "Don't be naive, Landon. Your father wasn't sentimental. He was a builder. He knew how to leverage assets." "Maybe," I said, "but you're confusing leverage with love." She didn't answer, just shifted her stance like a chess player trying to find a new line of attack. "You think you're winning," she said finally, "but you don't see it. You're not beating us. You're isolating yourself, and when the shine wears off, no one will be left to clap." I nodded slowly. "You might be right." And then I handed her a folder. It contained a press release I had just approved, scheduled to go live Monday morning. Title: Heir Reclaims Legacy: How Landon Reed Turned a Threatened Property into a Community Landmark. Her hand tightened around the folder. "This isn't a game." "No," I said quietly. "It's not." And for the first time, she blinked first. The storm hit just after midnight. Savannah storms don't roll in with warning. They swallow. One moment the air's heavy with anticipation, the next it's splitting at the seams. Thunder cracked like sky-tearing judgment. Rain lashed against the windows of Reed House Inn in sheets. But inside, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the front hallway, and the soft rustle of my fingers turning brittle pages in a leather-bound book. The guest ledger. My father kept one for decades, not just for reservations, but for handwritten notes. He believed guests weren't just transactions, they were stories, and every visit mattered. He'd write things like, "Anniversary, 40 years, left flowers in room 3. Vet from Indiana, quiet, gave him extra blankets. Little girl drew a picture of the fireplace, framed it." I hadn't opened the ledger since the funeral. That night, alone in the inn, lit only by a desk lamp and the occasional flicker of lightning, I turned to the last entry my father had ever written. And everything changed. It was dated 2 weeks before his stroke. Just a single line, nearly illegible. "If anything happens, look behind the portrait in room 6. I sat still for a full minute, listening, breathing. Then I stood, took the master key from the drawer, and climbed the stairs. The hallway to room 6 smelled like old pine and forgotten holidays. My father used to keep the doors open during the off-season, just to air the place out. The door creaked open. Room 6 looked untouched. Floral wallpaper, 4-poster bed, a love seat with velvet cushions, and above it, the portrait of a nameless 1800s gentleman. I stepped closer. The frame was slightly tilted. I reached behind it. My fingers touched paper. It was a manila envelope, sealed with a strip of brittle wax and a note clipped to the front. "For Landon, if he ever comes back." Inside were 3 documents. 1. A revised will, signed and notarized, listing me as the sole heir and custodian of Reed House Inn and its surrounding properties. 2. A handwritten letter explaining his fears about how Victoria might manipulate the estate if he died unexpectedly. 3. A property deed I didn't recognize, transferred quietly into my name through a trust. I stood there for a long time, the storm groaning outside, this envelope in my hands like a lifeline across time. The letter began with my name. "Landon, I know you probably don't want to hear from me in this way. I wish I could say this over coffee, on the back porch, with the smell of crepe myrtle in the air. But if you're reading this, then I've run out of time." He wrote about the years he wished he could undo, about marrying too soon after my mother, about how grief made people greedy, how it made him blind to the cracks in his new life. Victoria's not evil, son. But she's afraid. And afraid people build cages around what they think they can control. That includes you. He wrote that he had started the paperwork months before, in secret, with a lawyer friend from college who agreed to bury it in a trust until I returned. I didn't leave it in the office. I didn't want her to find it and tear it apart like she did your graduation photo. I hope you found this in time. At the bottom, smudged but visible, was his signature, Graham Landon Reed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the desk in room 6, the envelope beside me, the storm quieting to a soft patter by dawn. I thought about all the times I questioned whether he regretted choosing her over me, whether I was expendable, forgettable. But the truth was he hadn't forgotten. He had waited. He had trusted I'd return. And now, the real war had a new weapon: truth. Later that morning, I visited the law office listed in his letter, a narrow townhouse tucked behind Bay Street. The receptionist didn't ask questions, just buzzed me in. Mr. Thorne was in his 70s, with hands that trembled slightly and eyes that didn't. "You found it," he said before I could even sit down. "I did." He nodded. "Graham told me you'd come back. I wasn't allowed to contact you per his instructions, but I kept everything sealed, just as he asked." We spent the next hour going through the legalities. The new will would need to be presented in probate court, overriding the outdated version Victoria had weaponized. The deed to the undeclared parcel, a marshland behind the inn, was now publicly visible under my name. "It won't be a clean fight," Thorne warned, "but it's a righteous one." I nodded. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want legacy." The marble floors echoed louder than they should have. Chatham County Courthouse hadn't changed since I was a teenager, forced to sit through traffic violations and city zoning arguments with my father. But this time, I wasn't in the back row. I was center table. To my left, Mr. Thorne, calm and methodical, placed 2 leather-bound folders on the polished wood and adjusted his glasses. Across the aisle sat Victoria in a navy pantsuit, stiff as steel, flanked by her attorney, a man who looked like he hadn't lost a case in 15 years and didn't intend to start today. Preston was behind her, arms crossed. Amelia, absent. I didn't ask why. I didn't care. The judge entered, neutral, tired, old enough to care about order, not drama. He called the case. The contested reading of the last will and testament of Graham Landon Reed, deceased. Parties are present. Let the record reflect the motion for an override based on a newly presented document. Victoria's lawyer stood immediately. "Your Honor, we contest the validity of the revised will. It was not disclosed at the original estate hearing, and the petitioner has offered no evidence proving its timely execution." Thorne remained seated. "Your Honor, we have notarized dates, witness statements, and video footage from the Notary Public's office, as well as a sworn letter from Mr. Reed's estate advisor." The judge waved a hand. "I'll see the documentation. Mr. Reed, do you wish to speak?" I rose. My knees didn't tremble. My voice did not shake. "I didn't return to Savannah for a fight," I began. "I came to bury my father, pay my respects, and quietly restore the Reed House Inn. I didn't expect deception. I didn't plan for betrayal. But what I found, Your Honor, was a will, hidden behind a portrait, exactly where my father left instructions to find it, signed, sealed, and meant for the son who hadn't yet come home." I looked directly at Victoria. My father didn't die confused. He knew who I was. He knew what this place meant, and he didn't want his legacy to be gutted and sold like salvage. There was a pause. A stillness, even in the pews behind us. Then Thorne stood and passed the folder to the bailiff. Inside, a notarized video file with timestamps. The official envelope, untouched, dated. A deposition from my father's longtime business partner, confirming the conversation 6 months prior to his stroke. Victoria's lawyer tried to pivot. "This is emotionally compelling, Your Honor, but we must adhere to estate law. The original will was read and processed." "And overridden," the judge replied coolly, "if the revised documentation proves superior, which so far it appears to." Victoria's jaw tightened. I didn't smile. because this wasn't a victory yet. The judge leaned back, silent for a beat, then delivered the words, "I'll never forget." Effective immediately, the will dated March 22, filed under Estate Code 9C48-3, shall be entered into public record as the governing testament of Graham Landon Reed. The entirety of the Reed House Inn and associated properties are legally transferred to Mr. Landon Reed. The gavel dropped, case closed, but the real scene was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, the press had gathered, small-town outlets mostly, but a few from Charleston and Atlanta, drawn in by whispers of inheritance disputes and backroom dealings. Victoria descended the steps before me, heels striking with fury. She stopped just short of the sidewalk, then turned. "You really think you've won?" she hissed, too low for the microphones. "You have no idea what's coming next. This town, this legacy, you can't protect it from everyone." I leaned in. "I'm not trying to protect it from everyone. Just from people like you." She blinked. Rage and disbelief tangled across her face. Then she left. A young reporter asked for a comment. I gave her one sentence. "My father's legacy isn't for sale." Then I got in my truck and drove to the water. I didn't go back to the inn right away. I drove out to the marshland parcel, the quiet one tucked between the trees, marked only by a bent mailbox and a rusted sign that still read, "Private event use only." This land had been my father's dream for expansion, a retreat, a place for writers or veterans or artists who needed rest. Now it was mine, and I finally understood why he kept it hidden. Because legacy isn't what you leave people who betray you. It's what you reserve for those who remember who you were. That night, I returned to the inn. There was a letter waiting at the front desk. No stamp, no envelope, just a note in Amelia's handwriting. I didn't know about the forged agreement. I didn't sign anything. I was used too. I hope someday you believe that. I stared at it for a while, then placed it behind the guest ledger. Let the next chapter decide what to do with it. Victoria always thrived on control, so it was no surprise when I got the email, sent exactly 1 week after the estate hearing, titled, "Family Gathering, Attendance Required." There was no greeting, no warmth, just a time, date, and location. The back veranda of the Reed House Inn, Sunday at 3 p.m. Her arrogance was still intact. She assumed the title of host as if nothing had changed, as if the gavel hadn't dropped in my favor. I stared at the email for a few seconds, then did something that startled even me. I clicked forward, added 22 names, and pressed send. The recipients? The very people my father had called the town. Longtime guests, local vendors, the family who brought cider every Christmas Eve, a widow who once lived in room 4 for 2 months after losing her husband, former employees who left because of Victoria's impossible rules. If she wanted a family meeting, I was going to show her what real family looked like. Sunday arrived with spring sunlight so pure it felt like a rebuke, the kind of day my father would have called front porch weather. Victoria wore pearls. Preston stood beside her, jaw tight. A pitcher of lemonade sat untouched on a table set for 6. But by 3:05 p.m., there were more than 30 people gathered across the lawn. They came with pies and flowers and old photo albums. One man brought a guitar. Someone had even printed and framed a photograph of my father laughing under the willow tree out back. I walked up last. Victoria blinked. "What is this?" she asked, already rattled. "The family meeting you requested," I said, voice calm. "But I figured it was only fair everyone who felt like family got an invitation." What followed wasn't chaos. It was testimony. The widow from room 4 stood first. "Your husband saved my life," she said to Victoria, though she looked only at me. "He gave me shelter, food, and dignity when I had none left. You told the staff not to discount my stay. He overrode you. He paid for it himself." The cider couple brought out a wrapped bundle, the Guestbook page they'd signed with their kids every Christmas since 2008. They said they hadn't come last year. "It didn't feel like home anymore," the wife said. "Now it does." One by one, stories poured like wine. Victoria sat frozen. Preston eventually walked off. Amelia arrived late, stood by the trees, said nothing. Then came Dolores. She had worked at the inn for 16 years. She stepped forward slowly, a cane in one hand, an envelope in the other. "Your father gave me this 6 months before he died," she said. "Told me to give it to you only when it was time." Inside, photos, not documents, not deeds, photos. My father and me, as a boy, as a teen, my high school graduation, him pinning a boutonniere to my jacket, laughing, proud, holding me in the light of day. And one photo of him alone, seated at the writing desk in room 6, pen in hand. The date in the corner matched the revised will. Victoria didn't speak. She didn't need to. After the meeting, people lingered. They offered help, pledges of support. Someone brought out lemonade that finally got poured. Amelia approached just before dusk. "I didn't know about the hidden letter," she said. "Mom never told me, but I think he wanted me to see this. All of this." I nodded. "There's a place for you here," I said. "Maybe," she whispered, "but I think I need to build one on my own first." That night, I sat alone on the back veranda. The place was lit in string lights, laughter still echoing faintly across the lawn. I looked at the photo Dolores gave me. My father. Pen in hand. Eyes resolute. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, about remembering what love looked like in public, and making sure no one ever erased it again. You'd think after that meeting she'd back off. But Victoria was nothing if not persistent, or delusional. 3 days later, I arrived at the inn with plans to begin restoration, cleaning, sorting, prepping room 6 for archival framing, and found the front door padlocked. Not the usual lock, a brand new industrial-grade bolt with a digital keypad. She didn't even try to pretend it was for security. There was a note taped to the door, addressed to me. "Pending legal clarification of management rights, no entry is permitted. Contact Victoria Reed for inquiries." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Her fingerprints were all over it. I stood on the porch, my palm resting on the brass railing my father had polished every Sunday morning for 15 years. I closed my eyes, let the cool metal ground me. Then I did something she never expected. I didn't fight her. I walked away. Not because I was giving up, but because I had something better. The real blueprint. Back when I was 18, I spent a summer interning with a historic preservation nonprofit. My father had slipped me the idea, encouraging me to learn the real language of buildings, load-bearing versus decorative, original beams versus retrofits, the value of what's authentic. That summer, I kept a sketchbook. Not just of the properties I worked on, but of Reed House itself. Floor plans, notes, furniture tags, stories guests had told me, mapped to specific rooms. A guest once said she saw her late husband sitting in the red wingback chair in room 9. I drew it and wrote her name under it. That sketchbook was more than a personal project. It was a living history. And now, it was my weapon. The town loved Reed House, yes, but the County Historical Board? They worshipped it. The board had already received notice from my legal team about the revised will, but now I approached them not as a grieving son, but as a preservationist. I filed a formal proposal for landmark status, included architectural renderings, documented stories, attached statements from community members, Dolores, the Sider family. Even Amelia offered a letter. The application included a clause that, if approved, would prevent any future renovations or demolitions without oversight. The best part? If granted, it would invalidate any unauthorized modifications made in the last 6 months, like Victoria's. While we waited for the board's decision, I shifted focus to something more symbolic. The garden. I started with the eastern edge, where my dad had planted foxglove and sage the year my mother died. He said it was a way of making beauty out of absence. I worked quietly, shovel by shovel, weed by weed. People began to join. A retired florist brought seedlings. Dolores baked sandwiches. The Sider couple came with a picnic and pruning shears. By day 5, the Eastern Garden had become a community project. Victoria called the sheriff, But when he arrived, saw the people working, saw the sketchbook I carried tucked under one arm, and the notarized deed copy in my back pocket, he tipped his hat and said, "Looks like restoration to me." The call came a week later. Landmark status. Approved. Victoria couldn't even repaint the shutters without submitting forms to the board, and the best part? She still didn't know I'd filed it. Not until she arrived one morning, furious to see a team of historical consultants measuring cornices and tracing paint samples with gloved fingers. "Who authorized this?" she barked. "I did," I said calmly, stepping out from room 6. She opened her mouth, but I raised my sketchbook. "You tried to lock me out," I added. "But this? This has always been mine." That night, I unlocked the original blueprint drawer behind the reception desk, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a note in my father's handwriting: "Land belongs to those who remember it with love." I ran my hand over the page, then shut the drawer softly. Restoration wasn't just about structure, it was about roots, and mine were deeper than any lock she could buy. I should have known she wouldn't stop at locks. The next move was worse, more cruel, more calculated. Victoria didn't just want to control the inn, she wanted to sell it to a corporate hospitality group out of state with no history here and no ties to the Reed name. They promised modernization and profit optimization. That meant bulldozing the charm, replacing the creaky oak floors with laminate, and tearing down the hand-carved stair railings my grandfather made with his own hands. And she was close. The sale was set to be finalized in 14 days. She had the paperwork drawn, she had Amelia's reluctant signature, and she thought mine wasn't needed. But she had overlooked two critical details. The revised will named me majority stakeholder, and the inn wasn't just mine, it was ours. So I called a meeting, not with lawyers or Victoria, but with the people. Guests, former staff, neighbors, contractors, local artists who had paintings on the walls. Everyone who had left a piece of themselves inside those rooms. We gathered in the garden under cafe lights. I brought out the old ledger book from the welcome desk and asked them to write. Stories, memories, moments. I called it the Heart Ledger. Over 3 evenings, it filled. Page after page. A mother who said her child took his first steps in room 3. A couple who got engaged under the willow. A woman who scattered her father's ashes behind the greenhouse and returned every spring to plant hyacinths. Then I made calls to the city paper, a local news station, the Regional Preservation Society. On the 5th evening, I stood on the porch and read selections from the ledger. We lit lanterns, one for every story. The garden glowed. The next morning, the front page of the Savannah Post read, "Corporate chain to erase beloved local inn, but the town fights back." I sent a scanned copy of the article to Victoria. Her reply was chillingly short. "This changes nothing." But it did, because the buyer pulled out. They cited unforeseen reputational risk. Victoria was livid. She left a voicemail full of venom, claiming I had sabotaged a perfectly good exit plan. But she didn't see what I saw, that this place wasn't something to exit from, it was something to come home to. Days later, the city council called. They offered a community preservation grant, $40,000 to begin structural restoration, with more available if we documented community use. I accepted. Then I offered something back. I turned the solarium, once a storage room under Victoria's rule, into a public library annex, stocked with books donated from guests and locals, every spine labeled Reed House Collection. It wasn't about real estate. It was about real estate, the emotional kind, the kind that held stories and time and laughter and tears. The inn was breathing again. With every step I took through the halls, I heard echoes of gratitude, quiet conversations, and stories sewn into the wallpaper. Victoria had tried to sell its bones, but I had handed its soul back to the people who built it, and they weren't going anywhere. The morning after the grant was approved, I found her standing at the edge of the driveway. Victoria was staring up at the old wooden sign that hung above the garden gate, Reed House Inn. Its lettering faded, the wood chipped and sun-bleached. She didn't turn to face me. "We could have rebranded," she said. called it something more modern, more appealing to the new generation. That name means nothing now. I didn't respond. Not then. But I knew what I had to do. The sign wasn't just a label, it was a witness. It had stood through hurricanes and heat waves, celebrations and grief, and it deserved to stand proud again. I drove out to Tybee Island that weekend to find Elias, a retired craftsman whose family had carved church pews and steeples for over a century. I showed him the sign. He ran his hand across its surface, cracked and dry. "You want it restored or remembered?" he asked. "Both," I said. While Elias took the sign, I searched the archives for the original Reed House crest. I found it tucked inside an old journal belonging to my great-grandmother, an oak tree woven with ivy, and beneath it the words, "Rooted in Welcome." I had it etched in gold and recreated for the new design. 3 weeks later, Elias delivered the finished piece. It was stunning, carved from polished cherry wood, the letters hand-cut with precision, the crest shimmering under the light. But more than beautiful, it felt alive, as if it carried every name ever logged into the Guestbook, every whispered goodnight, every memory pressed between linens. I mounted it myself, with help from the local scout troop and Dolores, who brought lemonade and stories from her childhood. The town gathered quietly for the unveiling. No ribbon, no speeches, just us. When we lifted the covering cloth, a hush fell over the group, followed by gentle clapping. Some people cried. Even Amelia wiped her eyes. Victoria didn't attend, but I sent her a photo. Her response was a one-line text, "Enjoy your little museum." It wasn't little, it was living. That same weekend, our bookings nearly doubled, not because of marketing or discounts, but because people felt the spirit again. A guest told me it was the first time in years she felt like she was visiting someone's home, not just a business. The name Reed wasn't just a name, it was heritage, and now every visitor who walked through the gates saw it shining overhead like a promise. This place remembers you, and we remember who we are. There was one last card she thought I didn't hold. The will had been amended, the inn restored, the community rallied. But Victoria, relentless, sharp, and desperate, still filed for a formal injunction. She claimed I had forged intent, that my father never meant to leave me the majority stake. The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was emotional archaeology, and I brought a shovel. Not for dirt, for names. I carried the Guestbook, the original one, leather-bound, corners worn, dated from 1963. Every page a signature, a memory, a moment that marked why this place mattered. I opened it in front of the judge. "This," I said, voice steady, "isn't just a guest registry. It's a record of community impact, of intention, of legacy." I turned pages slowly, reading entries. "Thank you, Mr. Reed, for giving us a place to heal. Your kindness saved our honeymoon. We came strangers, left family." I handed it to the court clerk. Victoria objected. Her lawyer muttered something about irrelevance, but the judge leaned forward. "This isn't irrelevant," she said. "This is testimony." We had letters too, from former guests, from preservation board members, even from a senator who once stayed during a family crisis. But the Guestbook? It was the heartbeat. It proved that my father's work extended beyond property lines, that he wasn't just a business owner, he was a steward. And he had always said stewardship was earned, not inherited. When it was Victoria's turn, she waved glossy brochures and market projections. She talked about ROI, future-facing vision, and the dead weight of nostalgia. The judge listened politely. Then she asked a single question. "Do you have any evidence, letters, recordings, witnesses, that Mr. Reed intended for you to control this estate?" Victoria's lips thinned. "He told me I had a good head for management." "That's not binding," the judge replied. It took only 30 minutes for the ruling. My inheritance was upheld, full controlling interest reaffirmed. Victoria was ordered to cease all interference. The judge closed her remarks with something I'll never forget. "In matters of legacy, documents speak, but the lives touched speak louder." Outside, the town waited. When I stepped onto the courthouse steps, applause rose like sunlight through storm clouds. Dolores hugged me. The florist brought a single magnolia bloom. Even Amelia squeezed my hand, but it was the book in my arms, heavy, leather-worn, and full of stories, that mattered most. She thought legacy could be contested, but I had the signatures to prove otherwise, and this time, the court agreed. After the ruling, there were no fireworks, no champagne, just silence in the car ride home, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of all the names that had spoken for me, full of the echoes in every hallway of the inn, full of my father's voice, though it hadn't been heard in court. He had spoken loudest through the life he left behind. Victoria didn't show up again. She didn't call, didn't write. Her attorney emailed notice that she would be transferring any remaining rights, effective immediately. I half expected another twist, but none came. Sometimes when power leaves a person, so does their interest, and just like that, she was gone. The inn felt different, quieter, but not lonely. At sunrise the next morning, I stood out on the porch with my coffee and looked at the new sign. The gold leaf caught the light just so, making it look like it glowed. Birds stirred in the trees. Somewhere someone was frying bacon. A dog barked. Life, resuming. I walked the halls slowly, running my hand across the wood paneling. In the east wing, where the paint still peeled, I saw new things. Potential, not decay. In the parlor, where we'd once taken family Christmas photos, I laid out plans for a storytelling corner for children. Upstairs, I opened the window in room 5, letting in the breeze. The room still smelled like lavender. There was work to do, but for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just living. 2 weeks later, we hosted our first official community night. Music, poetry, cookies made from my grandmother's recipe. Dolores brought her fiddle. Amelia read a passage from a memoir she was writing. The inn, lit from within, looked less like a house and more like a heartbeat. I didn't make a speech, but I did stand by the door all night, welcoming every guest, shaking every hand, learning every name. And as I did, I realized something. They had tried to write me out of the future, but the future was never theirs to write alone. I had built something different, one room at a time, one memory at a time. Not perfect, not polished, but wide open. I left the front door unlocked that night, on purpose, because sometimes the best kind of revenge is a welcome. And this place, my place, was finally ready to begin again. Some women don't need to raise their voice or seek revenge to reclaim what's theirs. They just need to return, stand tall, and lift what was buried with grace. She didn't just fight for an inheritance. She reignited the heart of a home that had been quietly dismantled by those who never understood its worth. What I admire most wasn't her strategy, it was her compassion. She didn't weaponize her victory. She opened the door. She chose restoration over retaliation. And in doing so, she reminded us that legacy isn't built on control, it's built on care. In a world quick to erase, she chose to remember. And sometimes the most powerful kind of justice is healing. If this story touched you, subscribe to Revenge with Seren. Because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming. Just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed rising, brilliant and unshaken.